As with anywhere, Utah has its fair share of irreligious people, the atheists, agnostics, those who would check the none box for religious affiliation. But even irreligion in Utah is flavored by Mormonism. Because of this, Utah ministry people need to be prepared to defend the faith a bit differently than their non-Utah counterparts might. You may already know that many exiting Mormons head straight for atheism or agnosticism. In fact, some would suggest that as numbers as high as 60%, even higher than that, go directly towards some form of irreligion once they leave Mormonism. It really does, the LDS Church, have a singular exit door aimed right at atheism. I've even heard ex-Mormons tell me that their LDS family would have rather them become atheist than convert to Christianity. We really do have our work cut out for us. We have to be prepared to deal with the most fundamental questions that might come from somebody who's atheist here, who has Mormonism in the back of their mind, probably without even knowing it. Consider the following. Many ex-Mormon atheists still hold certain Mormon teachings. The Bible is not trustworthy. This is one of the things we hear from Mormons, and we also hear from those who've left Mormonism. Because it is taught in the LDS Church that the Bible transmission process should not be trusted, that even the stories from their origins can't be trusted, that many plain and precious truths have been removed, most atheist ex-Mormons still maintain those wrong thoughts. I've heard so many people say something about how the Council of Nicaea is where the canon of the Bible was invented or created for the first time. And with certainty, many, even atheists, might say that, which is a really decidedly Mormon way of talking out here in Utah. Even atheist ex-Mormons might say that the Bible is so confusing or it's so contradictory in all the passages that it has that we can't trust it. Even knowing just the basics of Mormonism, you'll know that there are 4 Mormon scriptures, those that are in their quad. And while the Bible is in there, it's the least trustworthy of those. Because of that, it's common for Mormons to throw it under the bus if it seems to say something they disagree with. Atheists who used to be Mormon, of course, do the same thing. And it seems like they never quite realize that Mormon statement should be tested. There's a heightened level of scrutiny to the Bible in Mormonism that doesn't quite exist in the same way in Christianity. As we learn to understand more and more and more scriptures and see them come to light with more and more and more truth, we develop a greater trust in the Word. Mormons don't quite have that. So when someone leaves Mormonism for atheism, in the mind is that the Bible should not be trusted. Think about lines like Jesus being seated at the right hand of the Father. A Mormon might think of that as saying that there's a physical hand of God that is only a few feet away from Jesus who's seated there. And they might develop a kind of scrutiny about that language that Christians don't have because we acknowledge that God does not have a body. And even in those visions, it's more telling us something about Jesus' authority at his right hand rather than almost touching certain appendages. Ex-Mormon atheists often leave because of issues regarding the nature of God. Mormonism teaches that Jesus really is a creature. He's one of us in a different phase of development. And while they'd put him in a higher camp than us because of his goodness and maybe his righteousness or what he accomplished in the atonement, he's thought of as just a mere man, our older brother. When an atheist rejects Mormonism, he's rejecting the Jesus who's merely the older brother and not necessarily rejecting Jesus who is God. Another common Mormon thinking is that God thinks like we think. He's just another man who's exalted to godhood, and so he reasons like we reason. All judgment should comport with our understanding of it here, even regardless of cultures and societies. And so the God that sometimes atheists who used to be Mormon will reject is the Mormon version of a God rather than what the Bible actually tells us about him. Many ex-Mormon atheists leave the church because they have a disdain for organized religion. Their assumption then is that the organization that they observed in the LDS church would be just the same as they'll find in the Christian church, Catholic church, anywhere else. And so they're eager to jettison all possible organized religion because they are assuming that religion will be the same outside of Mormonism as it is inside. God speaks through top-down systems in Mormonism. In fact, they believe that the modern prophecy and the organizational structures of the church are to mirror what the Old Testament was, which is a top-down man at the top, multiple men under him, kind of a pyramid structure. And so maybe an atheist would have a right impulse to press against that kind of structure out of a distrust for humanity. They might even have a good understanding of the depravity of man that would lead them out of Mormonism, but their assumption that all religions have that might be influenced by what they once believed as an LDS person. Us knowing that about them might help us overcome that particular issue with that atheist. Other ex-Mormon atheists leave the church over history issues. They say, I studied the history of Mormonism, I found some things that I just can't square up with reality, I'm out. I found some historical anachronisms in the Book of Mormon, or I found some really disturbing evidences against the character of the early teachers of the church. And while they'll leave the LDS church, their assumption is that therefore they should just leave all of Christianity because we must also have the same historical problems and the same leadership problems in our New Testament. It's funny how oftentimes we might be able to say that we agree with the atheist issues with Mormon history, but it doesn't need to lead us to reject Christianity. Those aren't equivalent. Some claims of Mormonism are categorically false and can be proved such, historically, scientifically, both by things that we can find in the standard works of Mormonism or in statements made by past prophets of the LDS Church that we can square up directly with science and history today and know are false. Mormons oftentimes put all religion into that category and reject it at once as they leave to atheism. Knowing this might help us deal with those people. Another reason that many Mormons leave the Mormon church and become atheists is because they believe that religious people are supposed to judge others. Now, you and I might know of individual Christians or groups of Christians who've not done very well on this and have done a poor job of judging outsiders rather than listening to Paul's instruction to not judge those outside the church but inside. But Mormons specifically have been taught that even innocuous things like drinking a cup of coffee or having tea or mowing your lawn on Sunday or taking your family out to dinner on a Sunday afternoon are sinful and signs that a person is not godly. Even in past generations, Mormons have believed that the color of a person's skin might determine whether or not they're righteous or not righteous before God, or have any stigma on them for wickedness in a past life, in the pre-existence or something like that. And so when somebody leaves Mormonism, they might have in mind that all religious people are supposed to judge those outside the church. Think about how important it can be for us then to try to explain that that's not what our Bible teaches. We agree with the sound judgment of God in the Bible, but have compassion on people who even hate us. We are to love our enemies, and we are to be eager to try to not extend judgment to those outside the church. These types of things are so different in the way that the Christian worldview centers itself around the lost world and the way that the LDS church thinks about those who aren't inside of their church. The point is that many people leave Mormonism for reasons unrelated to Christianity. And it is helpful for us to be prepared to understand why they left. What was the impulse that drove them out of religion altogether, so that we can help them better deal with those objections.